Hey guys, and welcome back, or if you're new here, hi, my name's Georgia, and on my platforms here on the internet, I mostly talk about true crime. I like to talk about cases that didn't get the attention they deserved at the time they happened, cases which maybe if they'd had a little bit more media attention, they might have been able to get solved, and that is very much what this case today comes under. The case I want to share with you today is an unsolved murder case from almost 30 years ago, the murder of 17-year-old Beth-Ellen Vinson. Her car was found abandoned on the side of the road, a single shoe was found in the driver's footwell, and then just 1 week later her body is found less than a mile away. Investigators say there is evidence in this case, it's definitely still solvable even this far down the line. They just need the last piece of the puzzle to put it all together. I feel like Beth-Ellen's case is one that isn't very well known, so hopefully we can help rectify that today. This is going to be a shorter episode, there isn't loads of information out there about this case, but I don't really think that makes it any less worthy of being spoken about. Beth-Ellen Vinson was a teenage girl with big dreams, big goals, and she really was the type of person to make those goals a reality. She was born on the 16th of February 1977 and grew up in the small North Carolina town of Goldsboro. I mean, Goldsboro wasn't the smallest place in the world. The census tells me that in 1990 it would have had a population of around 40,000 people, but for somebody like Beth-Ellen with these big dreams, it wasn't big enough. You see, Beth-Ellen was a dancer, and an incredibly talented dancer at that. She was too talented for the small town dance shows and the competitions, and she set her sights on Broadway. That is where she was going to end up, and she would do anything to get there. Her uncle Russell Vinson told ABC, "I remember the little girl who was pretty much the light of our family, and the excitement showed when she entered dance competitions." Beth-Ellen didn't know it was going to be one hell of a journey from Goldsboro to Broadway, so at age 17 she decided that she needed to take the first step to realise her dreams, and so she moved to Raleigh, the capital city of North Carolina. Now this was only about an hour northwest of her hometown, but she was 17. Her parents, Bill and Penny, weren't exactly enthused about the idea of her going, but she'd made up her mind she wanted to start her life. So that's exactly what she did. In 1994, she moved to Raleigh with her boyfriend, Rick Heath. Penny Vinson would later say to journalist Phyllis Moore for the Goldsboro News Argus that their standards were the same for all three of their children. But Beth-Ellen was definitely the most rebellious of the three, and she often chose to listen to her friends over her parents, which is very classic behaviour for so many teenage girls. But Beth-Ellen had had a bit of a difficult time recently. Not long after her 17th birthday, Beth-Ellen had been driving to her friend's house to go for a drive with the top down of her Mustang convertible. They ended up being involved in quite a bad car crash and her friend was seriously injured, and Beth-Ellen really struggled with the guilt of that. I mean, that's such a heavy thing for anyone to bear, let alone a teenage girl, and her parents say that she really changed after that point. She became reclusive, she rejected her friends and got involved with a new crowd. She changed her clothes and her hair, she started rebelling more and more, and then one day she just gets in her car and drives away, moving to Raleigh. Bill Vinson would say, "Penny and I talked over at length and we came to the conclusion that the only way for her to come back and stay back was for her to come back and stay back. In other words, we could go and get her and drag her back, but at the first opportunity, we felt like she'd be gone again. We felt like this was a real maturing process. It's something that she needed to go through, something that she needed to handle on her own." So Rick and Beth-Ellen move in together into an apartment close to North Carolina State University on Avant Ferry Road. 21-year-old Rick was a student at the university, so this made sense. This was only supposed to be a temporary stop, so Beth-Ellen could work as a dancer, get as much experience as possible, and save up money so she could get to New York. Soon after arriving in Raleigh, Beth-Ellen found work as a private dancer with an escort service. I can't imagine it's what she had at the top of her list, but it did check boxes. She got dance experience and she would be earning a lot of money. She could get to New York quicker. Pretty much every source says that Beth-Ellen worked as a private dancer, but the FBI VICAT page just says that she worked for the escort service, so take from that what you will. This was a headstrong and determined teenage girl. She would have done whatever it took to get to Broadway. She was also a very accomplished beauty queen, having done many pageants throughout her life. She was just a beautiful girl. However, she struggled to make the money she was promised with the escort service, and she was quickly disillusioned by the work. The client scared her, they had very different expectations of what she was offering, and she even allegedly confided in a friend at one point that she had been raped by a client. But of course, when police investigated the claim, they weren't able to substantiate it. A reminder here that the conviction rate for reported rapes is under 2%, or at least it is here in the UK, but it's similar across the board. It is simply not good enough. Only around 3 weeks after she moved to Raleigh, in the early hours of August 16th, 1994, Beth-Ellen received a call from the escort service. They said she had a client waiting for her at the Innkeeper Motel off Capitol Boulevard. So she left her apartment on Avent Ferry Road around 2:30 a.m. to head to the client, and then just never arrived at the motel. 3 hours later, her car, a 1990 white four-door Mazda 626, was found by the entrance of a car dealership on Capitol Boulevard, and it was an employee of the car dealership who called it into police when they turned up to work at 5:30 a.m. and just found the entrance blocked. Investigators turned up at the scene shortly after, and they found a bit of an odd scene. The windows of the car were rolled down and the radio was still playing, as if whoever had abandoned the car had either done so in a hurry or they left with the intention of returning very, very shortly. But alongside this, they also found a single shoe in the footwell of the driver's side, immediately making them believe that foul play was likely involved here. The driver seemed to be forcibly removed from the car. It didn't take long for them to identify Beth-Ellen as the driver in question here. As investigators arrived at the scene and started looking at the car, her boyfriend Rick reportedly drove up right next to them, presumably after recognising the car, and he informed them that he'd been out looking for her. She'd been gone all night and hadn't returned home. He was really concerned. Now bear in mind, by this point it was only around 6 a.m. A week passed with no sign of Beth-Ellen anywhere. Although the worst was kind of assumed from the state of the car, people did just hope that she would turn up alive somewhere. But then, a week later, on August 23rd, a factory worker found her body in a ditch between two warehouses on Atlantic Avenue. She'd simply been covered with some flattened cardboard, and this was less than a mile from where her car had been found. Reportedly, the employees inside the factory could smell something really strange, so they went out searching for the source, and that's how they came across Beth-Ellen's body. Most sources just state that she'd been stabbed in excess of 15 times, but in an interview, her dad Bill would say, "The person that left my daughter on a ditch bank with 28 stab wounds should be punished." I assume he would know the correct details of this case, so perhaps it was as many as 28 stab wounds. That is a violent death, a violent murder. It suggests anger behind it. By the time she was found, she'd been lying in the hot North Carolina sun in August for many days, so her body was already significantly decomposed, which made the autopsy a bit more difficult. But police did say that they doubted she was sexually assaulted. This isn't a 100% she wasn't sexually assaulted, but they couldn't find the evidence to back it up. It did take them a while to identify the body because of the level of decomposition, and in the end they had to turn to dental records, but I think from early on they knew it was Beth-Ellen, they just couldn't confirm it without the records. Just 3 days after her discovery, a $6,000 reward was announced by the North Carolina Governor's Office along with Raleigh Crimestoppers for any information that could lead to the solving of this case. By September 8th, the reward amount would be doubled to $12,000. In the months immediately after the murder, things would be happening in the investigation. In the October, a local newspaper in Raleigh would receive an anonymous letter giving potential insight into the murder. According to this anonymous letter writer, Beth-Ellen was working for people with unique tastes, and she'd apparently tried to blackmail the members of a sadomasochistic group that she'd been working for, and it backfired. The letter says that she'd been earning about $300 to $500 per job without providing any sexual acts to her clients, but apparently she got tired of the pain she received during these meetings, the sadomasochism, and so she'd been blackmailing the customers. However, none of the information shared in this letter has ever been confirmed. We have no idea if this was somebody genuinely connected to this case, or if it was just an odd person wanting to get involved. One thing I do want to say though is that the FBI state that Beth-Ellen had only been in Raleigh for sort of 3 to 4 weeks for her murder, and I don't know if that's long enough for her to get sick of treatment and start a whole blackmailing campaign. I mean, that sounds like something you'd find in a movie, not in real life. You've also got to wonder why this anonymous person sent the letter to the newspaper and not the police. This definitely suggests this was somebody who just wanted attention rather than somebody with legitimate information. Almost 2 years after the murder, with no more leads, on the 9th of May 1996, investigators released more information, details of items Beth-Ellen had with her on the morning she disappeared that have never been recovered. Specifically, when her body was found, her 4 rings were missing. That's a spoon ring made from a sterling silver spoon. The brand was Gorham and it had a Chantilly pattern. One of her mother's rings were missing. It was a 14-carat gold band with 2 amethyst stones on the outside and 1 garnet stone in the centre. She was wearing a faux silver mood ring with a white stone that got dark with body heat, and another amethyst ring, yellow gold with 1 purple amethyst in the centre and 2 diamond chips. The VICAP alert describes it as a stackable type ring, and all were a size 6. Obviously, some of them were worth more money than others, but all were missing. Police believe that the rings may have been given to somebody after the murder, and they don't believe that robbery was the motive here. Beth-Ellen just didn't have enough valuables on her to justify something like this, so the rings were probably taken as some kind of trophy or just clearing the body. Also missing from the scene was a pull-string shoulder bag that Beth-Ellen would have had with her. It was a cloth material in burgundy, burnt orange and brown. It was about 6 inches by 4.5 inches with black leather shoulder straps and the figure of a cowboy woven into the material. And it also had a zipper on the top. Whoever killed Beth-Ellen likely took it with them for whatever reason. Now, there are 2 sort of figures in this case you probably have some questions about, so hopefully I can answer those. The first is the client who Beth-Ellen was supposed to be meeting up with that night. I think it could be quite easily assumed that he must have been the one responsible here. However, it was eventually determined by the investigators that Beth-Ellen never made it as far as the motel that night. She never met this client. When they were able to track him down, they found this night he'd been on a bit of a binge. He'd been drinking, taking drugs and ordering sex workers for 24 hours solid. He was not in a good state, and when investigators eventually found him, he just couldn't recall if he'd met up with Beth-Ellen or not, if she'd ever made it to the motel. But after extensive investigation, it was found that she'd never made it. Whatever had happened to her on her way there. Now, I can't tell you what made investigators come to this conclusion. I presume maybe the side of the road the car was on and many other things. I guess there is a lot of information in this case they have never shared with the public. It's a case of just having to trust the investigators are correct, I guess. The client does seem like the obvious choice of suspect in this case. All too often we do see serial killers targeting sex workers, but it just doesn't match up. If the client was responsible, she would have made it as far as the motel. But let's say for argument's sake that she did and the killer then just moved her car, they wouldn't have moved it to such an obvious place. It drew so much attention. A full investigation started within hours. The killer would also have just happened to move the car to a spot that was en route from Beth-Ellen's house or apartment to the motel. Like, that just doesn't seem realistic. No, it just seems a lot more opportunistic. It seems to me that something happened on the side of the road that caused Beth-Ellen to pull over. Did somebody in a car behind her signal for her to pull over? Was somebody pretending to be a police officer? Was there a hitchhiker or somebody in distress? It doesn't seem like she left the car of her own accord. It certainly seems like somebody dragged her out against her will. She didn't even take the time to roll up the windows or turn the radio off. Which brings us to Beth-Ellen's boyfriend, Rick Heath, as another possible suspect. Rick was questioned in the early days of this case, but he was never charged with anything. Sources say that he did fail a polygraph test at the same time of his questioning, but investigators had very sort of conflicting ideas of just how damning this really was. We all know that polygraph tests are incredibly unreliable. They cannot be used in a court of law. They just don't really mean much because they're supposed to show stress levels, indicating if somebody is lying or not. But in a situation like this, your girlfriend has been murdered or abducted and you're being looked into as a suspect, you're going to be pretty stressed regardless of whether you're telling the truth or not. As I said, Rick failed the polygraph, but is anyone really surprised? He just wasn't a good candidate for it. Apparently, the lead investigator on this case did want him arrested, but nobody else could quite agree. But if he were hypothetically guilty, what would be Rick's motive here? Maybe he didn't like Beth-Ellen working as a private dancer, maybe they'd had an argument. But still, the location here makes me question the likelihood of this. If he was going to lose his cool and kill her, it would be at home in their apartment. Of course, he could have killed her at home, then driven her car to this location, but the timeline feels odd. The escort agency called here just before 2 a.m. to say there was a client. Beth-Ellen definitely answered the phone. The car was found by 5:30 a.m. If, and it's a big if, I am just theorising here, Rick was guilty and he killed Beth-Ellen at home, he would have had to think and act fast, come up with the perfect cover story under immense stress. Would he have had the foresight to get in her car, drive it to this perfectly suspicious location, and leave one single shoe in the footwell? To remove her rings and dispose of her bag to add extra layers to this case? This wasn't some practice killer, this was a 21-year-old man who, we're theorising, lost his cool and murdered her. No, based on the publicly available information in this case, it just doesn't work. I don't think Rick did this. You're telling me that somebody who can lose their cool and kill somebody in the heat of the moment can then go on to do something so methodical so quickly? No, this case screams opportunistic. Something happened at the side of that road. Of course, that's my own opinion, that's my own theory. I just think something happened en route. In a 2014 press conference, homicide detective Jerry Falk said that he still believes this case can be solved. He said to the killer, if you've been living with this for 20 years, if you've been carrying around a burden for 20 years, it may be weighing on you and it may be time for you to remove that weight. Investigators believe this is a solvable case. There is evidence, but just haven't been able to link it to a particular person. But Falk stresses that what might seem like a completely insignificant detail to one person may be the information that breaks this case wide open. As always, I'll leave contact details in the description down below in case anyone has any information. The Vinsons still hope this case will get solved. They've said they've just learned to live with it, to live with the grief and the unknown, but of course they would prefer answers. Even if the person is caught and punished though, it will never be anywhere near as violent as what Beth-Ellen experienced that day. But they do just want that final puzzle piece. They want to be able to rest. Quote, there's someone walking around who brutally murdered a 17-year-old girl. He may even have a family of his own. But if he's caught and publicly admonished for what he's done, the puzzle will be finished. As I said at the beginning of this episode, this is a case which isn't very well known. I don't know if it's particularly well known within Raleigh itself, within North Carolina. All I know is I spend a lot of time researching true crime, and the name Beth-Ellen Vinson isn't one that I'd come across before. One of you guys suggested that I looked into it. So as always, please do leave your requests, your recommendations for unsolved cases in the comments, and I will always do my best to look into them. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Like I said, if you are from this area, please do share this story, share this video around, and hopefully maybe we might be able to get some answers. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.